EVGA's closed-loop liquid cooler was shown at CES last month, marking the company's first foray into the erupting AIO market. The new EVGA CLC 280mm and 120mm coolers, and yes, the name is literally closed-loop cooler, will be competing in the same market as the NZXT, Kraken X62, and Corsair H115i. EVGA has taken a more balanced stance between Corsair and NZXT, offering some toned-down LED functionality, while also lowering price and keeping performance a focus. Before getting to that, this coverage is brought to you by Thermaltake and their Core P3 chassis, which can serve as an ad hoc test bench, or you could wall mount it, which makes it pretty unique, and otherwise is built of pretty simple and high quality materials. You can learn more at the link in the description below. Starting with the basics, EVGA's AIO units are pretty straightforward. There are two models. There's a 280mm right here, and then a 120mm, both of which use EVGA's backswept fan design. The pumps are Asetek Gen 5 pumps, which we figured out pretty easily by, well, one, asking, and two, taking it apart. And you can see that tomorrow from posting today. The teardown will go up one day later, and we'll link that in the description below once that's been posted. And the teardown reveals that the insides are what you would expect. It's a general Asetek Gen 5 pump. There's not a bunch of customization other than for the LED plate in the top of the cooler, and the PCB is pretty comparable to Corsair's H115i, but vastly different from NZXT's Kraken X62, which has two really heavily customized, well, one very heavily customized custom-made PCB, and that is entirely for the RGB functionality, and then the normal Asetek pump PCB. Pricing is $130 for the 280mm unit and $90 for the 120mm unit, which places EVGA right between Corsair and NZXT in terms of price for the size of the cooler. NZXT, as a reminder, their Kraken X62 direct competitor to this, is $160, pretty steep, and Corsair's H115i is priced at about $120. EVGA's cooler comes with the usual Intel and AMD brackets, and they'll also be offering free AM4 brackets for those who purchase a unit prior to the Ryzen launch, so they are planning for compatibility. Nothing is new with regard to mounting. It's the same trivial to install Asetek cap screws and standoffs as always, and we've come to appreciate those. And if you know installation for any other AIO, it's basically the same, especially if it's Asetek. A mini USB cable runs to a USB 2.0 header on the board to provide RGB LED control via software. The software unfortunately wasn't ready for us to fully dig through prior to the review's publication. Thanks to Chinese New Year, we weren't able to get that tool in time. But we've worked with the basics and can go through a few features that are noteworthy. One, EVGA plans to offer user serviceable firmware on the pumps, which is actually a substantial point of interest. And that means that you can update your firmware as you go or save profiles to it. In addition to user serviceable firmware, they're also planning to synchronize GPU and cooler LEDs through the software, and we think it'd be interesting if EVGA also explores this option for their motherboards in the future. The software offers the usual fan speed control options, and they also have liquid temperatures displayed there, which is based on a thermocouple that's placed inside of the pump block, reading the liquid temperature, and we show that in the teardown if you're curious. And then of course there's your cold plate at the very bottom of the whole thing, and that's got the really densely packed microfins that we've come to expect at this point from this type of AIO. So everything looks like it should. It's an assemblage of plastic and copper, more or less, with some liquid going through it. But the fans are quite a bit different. It's got the backswept fan blade design with an open chassis that's going to be pretty interesting for future testing. And then the pump plate and block itself allows for user customizable RGB LEDs, not to the extent of NZXT's, but still customizable more than Corsair's, and the profiles that can be saved to the pump itself, to the firmware, means that you can disconnect the cable later if you wanted to ditch it and just save a profile and let it run. Let's move on to testing and thermals. The methodology, as always, is defined fully in the article in the description below, and we also just posted about a 20-minute long video talking through just a few of the complications with thermal testing that you should think about if you are thinking of doing your own testing. What we do is measure ambient second to second. We measure the core temperature second to second and then do a delta value between them to account for ambient fluctuations. We're running the RPMs at 1050, 1500, and max RPM, which in the case of the 280mm unit is 2200 RPM. We'll be testing the 120mm unit later. When this video goes live, I'll be on a plane to California for an event. So that review will go live after, but for now 280 is the thing we're looking at versus the X62 and H100, or H115 and H100i really. To keep things simple, let's start with the EVGA only results, then add other 280 coolers, and then everything else. Averaged across more than 1,000 cells of data, we're seeing a load temperature of 39.5 Celsius delta T, while at the lowest fan RPM, matched with a 7.3 C idle temperature, again delta T. The 1500 RPM temperatures land at 5.4 Celsius idle and 34.7 load, with the unbearably loud 2200 RPM fan speed getting us an extra 2 degrees Celsius reduction in load temperatures. It's absolutely not worth the noise trade-off in this scenario, but the output does show what's capable if you wanted to live in a room where you've got a server level fan noise. We'll look at decibel numbers last for folks who are curious about noise output. Let's add the NZXT Kraken X62 competing 280 cooler and the Corsair H115i V2 numbers to this chart. Matching first against NZXT's Kraken X62, the EVGA 280mm CLC, which needs a new name. We're performing about 0.75 Celsius better than the X62. For the most part, this is a shallow victory. We've got a variance of approximately 0.5 Celsius in our results after accounting for calibration even. So these two coolers are functionally identical. NZXT is running at 35.49 Celsius delta T with EVGA at 34.75 Celsius delta T. And at the top end, EVGA has more RPM headroom on its fans, so it supports a higher speed and therefore tops the charts with a 32.86 Celsius delta T. And that's pretty damn good, but again, very loud. NZXT's highest RPM, also loud, is 1700, and that lands it at 34.63 Celsius delta T. Moving down now to 1050 RPM, we see EVGA start to lose some ground against NZXT's X62 unit. Our hypothesis currently for this is that the 2 Celsius deficit against NZXT's cooler is likely because EVGA loses power in its fan toward the low end of the PQ curve, which is strictly a function of fan design in this case. Let's talk Corsair now. Corsair's competing H115i is priced at $120, making it $10 cheaper than EVGA's and $40 cheaper than NZXT's coolers on this benchmark. Looking at the performance, we see Corsair's H115i at 1500 RPM is functionally identical to the Kraken X62 and falls within our test-to-test variance. The Corsair and NZXT units are equal strictly in terms of cooling at this RPM, making Corsair the obvious choice if you don't care for the LEDs. EVGA's CLC 280mm cooler outperforms Corsair by about 1 Celsius when at 1500 RPM. When we look at max RPMs, Corsair's cooler has fans that can hit 2300 RPM with its SP series fans, and that lands it at 33.4 Celsius load. Still, EVGA's new CLC 280 cooler lands at 32.86 and is a bit advantaged even with the 100 RPM lower fan speed, but of course design matters too. And finally, here's a chart with all of the temperature results. This has a couple other coolers present. If you're curious, you can dig through those, but they're all going to be in the article in the description below if you need more time for the chart. The most directly comparable units are still the 280mm coolers that we've mostly run through today. And for the final charts, we're looking at the noise levels. Noise levels are measured at 20 inches away with a dB meter mounted to a tripod, and we're seeing the EVGA 280 and NZXT 280 coolers both landing around 37 dBA with a 1050 RPM. Though keep in mind that EVGA was 2 Celsius warmer at this speed, so NZXT is advantaged in temperature. At 1500 RPM, where EVGA was advantaged in temperature, about 0.75 Celsius cooler, the EVGA unit runs at 45.2 dBA with the NZXT X62 at 46.4 dBA. So a bit of a gain there, but not too bad overall. We still have to test the Corsair H115i for noise levels, but you can see the rest of the noise tests on this chart from previous benchmarks. EVGA's first attempt at an AIO is remarkably strong. They've come out swinging and have already beaten NZXT in terms of noise levels, if just barely, and in terms of temperature levels at the mid-range. Again, just barely. Kind of a shallow victory because it doesn't gain you a whole lot in terms of performance, but they've done well for first iteration design. The only place EVGA falls behind is in the low end of the fan speed curve, where at 1050 RPM, they're 2 Celsius warmer than NZXT's X62 when it's at a similar or actually equal RPM. Ultimately, the product stack now pretty much looks like NZXT at the top in terms of price, not necessarily value, but price. They're at the top, and then EVGA and then Corsair for the main three we'd be looking at for this type of 280mm liquid cooler. EVGA, again, is at $130, Corsair $120, NZXT $160. NZXT's X60, well, really their entire line for the Kraken X2 series, but the X62, between the three products we're mainly talking about here, is a pretty tough sell unless you really, really like the RGB LEDs. That is its only seriously marketable point when compared against these two more function-focused coolers, like the EVGA and the Corsair H115 units. So if you really like the pump plate and the infinity design on NZXT's unit, and they do have far and away superior RGB LED control and quality in terms of color and functionality as a whole to anything on the table, NZXT is just better in that department right now, then clearly you should buy NZXT if that's what matters. If you don't care about that, EVGA's got lights, Corsair has lights. EVGA's are a little bit more intense and customizable than Corsairs, I suppose. So if that kind of matters to you, EVGA is the victor. If you just care about price, Corsair is still in a good position, but EVGA is actually outmatching Corsair for the most part and is only $10 more. Does the temperature difference matter? No, not really, because we're at a temperature at this point, even with the non-delta values, where you're not gaining any performance out of your CPU because you have an extra 1 degree cooler core on the CPU. It doesn't gain you a whole lot. If you just want to be better, EVGA is just better, and that's really all there is to it. At 1500 RPM, you're really at a tolerable noise level. That's probably where you want to stick. 2200 RPM is a server room noise level, intolerable, and I wouldn't recommend it. So you should really take heed of those results, I suppose. It makes them look great on the charts, but noise matters too. So that's all for this review. As always, subscribe for more. We'll have the 120 unit, 1 torn down tomorrow, and 2, the full review will be online once returned from the trip. And then we've got reviews of the Kraken series already, so check the channel for that. Patreon link in the post-roll video, patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, or go to the website, gamersnexus.net, where we've got the written review of this with a couple of extra tests, including one that I'm really interested in, where I'm going to be blocking off the sides of the fan where it's been cut out to see if that matters. Now, hopefully that goes up in time for today's review, but if not, check back. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time. It's a snowflake hair.